had been working at Morrison and Associates for 2 years, pulling 60-hour weeks and delivering results that literally kept our marketing department afloat. I wasn't asking for anything outrageous when I walked into Linda's corner office that Tuesday morning in January, just a raise that matched my contributions. She barely looked up from her phone, flashing that practiced corporate smile I'd grown to despise. "We'll discuss it in the next quarter, Sarah," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Budgets are really tight right now." I nodded politely, swallowing my disappointment. That was quarter one. I had no idea I was about to embark on an 8-month journey that would change everything between us. As I walked back to my cramped cubicle, I noticed the invoice on her desk for a $15,000 office renovation. Tight budgets indeed. April arrived with its usual spring promises, and I found myself back in Linda's office for our quarterly review. The renovation was complete now, gleaming hardwood floors, a designer desk that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and artwork that screamed expensive. I brought up the raise again, armed with a folder full of my achievements, campaigns I'd launched that brought in 6-figure clients, social media strategies that tripled our engagement, cost-saving measures I'd implemented. Linda shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair, the kind that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I really value your dedication, Sarah," she said, not bothering to open my folder, "but you know how it is with corporate budgets. These things take time." Through her window, I could see the construction crew installing the new executive break room with its marble countertops. Time and budget apparently were very selective commodities around here. By July, I was exhausted. I'd watched 3 talented coworkers leave for better opportunities, their departure emails citing growth potential elsewhere. The department was hemorrhaging talent, and I was picking up their slack without any additional compensation. When I knocked on Linda's door again, she didn't even pretend to be pleased to see me. She said, "We'll revisit this later. And Sarah, don't be pushy about it. That kind of attitude doesn't look good." The word pushy hit me like a slap. Pushy? For asking to be fairly compensated after 24 months of exemplary work? I left her office with my cheeks burning, not from embarrassment, but from a slow-building anger. That evening, I started updating my resume for the first time in 2 years. Maybe it was time to explore those external opportunities everyone else seemed to be finding. Just before you continue to watch, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage and help us keep creating amazing content for you. All right, back to the story. It was a Thursday evening in late August when everything changed. I was working late again, finishing a campaign proposal that was due the next morning. The office was eerily quiet, most people having left hours ago. I needed to grab some client files from the main conference room, and that's when I saw it. Linda's laptop, sitting open and unattended on the mahogany table. She'd been in a meeting with the CFO earlier and apparently forgot it in her rush to leave. I knew I should just walk away, but something made me pause. A notification bubble had popped up on her screen, an email thread marked Confidential Financial. My heart started racing. I looked around the empty office, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic outside. I took a step closer, telling myself I was just making sure her screen was locked for security purposes. The email wasn't just confidential, it was devastating. The thread showed months of correspondence between Linda and someone named Jay Patterson from something called Executive Solutions LLC? Invoice after invoice for consulting services that I'd never heard of. Marketing strategy development, brand analysis, campaign optimization, all services that sounded suspiciously like the work I'd been doing. Each invoice was for exactly the amount I'd been requesting for my raise, sometimes more. $15,000 here, $20,000 there. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the emails. The dates aligned perfectly with every time she told me budgets were tight. While I was begging for a modest salary increase, she was approving fake payments that could have funded raises for half the department. I quickly took photos with my phone, my heart pounding so loud I sure security would hear it from the lobby. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those invoice numbers dancing in my head. $15,000 for brand strategy consultation on the same day she told me we couldn't afford my $3,000 raise request. $22,000 for market analysis services the week after I'd presented my cost-saving initiatives that saved the company $50,000. The pattern was clear and sickening. I started researching J. Patterson and Executive Solutions LLC online, but found nothing. No website, no business registration, no social media presence. As if they didn't exist, which I was beginning to suspect they didn't. I spent the weekend going through every interaction I'd had with Linda over the past 8 months, seeing them all through this new lens. Every budget excuse, every delayed promise, every dismissive wave of her hand while she approved fictional expenses. My raise wasn't just denied, it was stolen. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early. I printed a single page from the evidence I'd gathered, just one invoice from Executive Solutions LLC for marketing consultation services dated the same week Linda had refused my raise request for budget constraints. No names, no identifying information about how I'd obtained it. I simply left it on her desk with a Post-it note that read, "Found this in the printer tray. Thought you might be looking for it." Then I went to my cubicle and waited. 20 minutes later, Linda's voice exploded through the office. "Who the hell has been messing with my documents?" She stormed out of her office, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. She marched from desk to desk demanding to know who had accessed her files. I kept typing at my computer, not looking up, but I could feel her eyes on me when she passed my desk. The fear in her voice was unmistakable. The change in Linda was immediate and obvious. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely nervous. She canceled her usual Thursday meeting with department heads, claiming she had urgent calls to make. Her office door, normally open for her frequent power walks through our cubicle maze, stayed firmly shut. Through the thin walls, I could hear her making hushed phone calls, her voice alternating between pleading and threatening. She kept glancing toward my desk whenever she thought I wasn't looking, and I caught her staring at me during our team meeting with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't the usual condescending authority or fake friendliness. It was fear. Real, bone-deep fear of someone who knew their secret was out, but didn't know how far it had spread. I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. After 8 months of being dismissed and diminished, seeing that uncertainty in her eyes felt like the first taste of justice. September's quarterly meeting arrived, and I decided to test just how much power I now held. When Linda asked for updates on current projects, I raised my hand. Before we discuss new initiatives, I'd like to revisit my compensation discussion from earlier this year. The room went silent. Linda's face drained of color, but she quickly recovered, forcing that corporate smile. "Sarah, this really isn't the appropriate forum for it," I interrupted her, something I'd never done before. "I think it's very appropriate. After all, if we're planning new projects, we should ensure we're retaining the talent to execute them." Her jaw tightened. "If you bring this up one more time in the wrong context, maybe this isn't the right company for you." The threat hung in the air like smoke, but instead of feeling intimidated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: power. I smiled back at her, knowing exactly what cards I held. "I completely understand your position, Linda." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, drafting the email that could end Linda's career. The recipient list was carefully chosen: our CFO, Marcus Webb, HR Director Janet Morrison, and, just for insurance, my contact at the local business journal who specialized in corporate fraud investigations. The subject line read, "Evidence of Financial Irregularities, Morrison and Associates Marketing Department." I attached screenshots of every fake invoice I'd found, organized by date with clear annotations showing how they corresponded to budget denials for legitimate employee requests. I outlined the pattern of fictional consulting expenses and highlighted the suspicious lack of any deliverables from Executive Solutions LLC. My finger hovered over the send button for nearly an hour. Once I sent this, there would be no going back. Linda's career would be over, but so might mine if she had powerful allies. I saved it as a draft instead. Sometimes the threat of exposure is more powerful than exposure itself. I began dropping subtle hints around the office, nothing traceable back to me. During coffee breaks, I'd mention how strange it was that we couldn't afford raises while the company seemed to have money for all sorts of external consultants. I'd wonder aloud why Linda always seems so stressed about budget meetings lately. "Have you noticed how many consulting invoices we've been getting?" I asked Janet from accounting during lunch. "I mean, what exactly are we paying all these outside firms to do that we can't handle internally?" Janet frowned, suddenly interested. "Which firms are you talking about?" I shrugged, innocently. "Oh, the usual suspects. Though I've never seen any reports or deliverables from some of them. Word spreads fast in a small office, especially when people are already frustrated about frozen wages and budget constraints. By Wednesday, I'd overheard 3 separate conversations about consulting expenses and accountability. The Whisper network was activated. Friday evening, Linda appeared beside my desk just as I was packing up to leave. Her usual commanding presence seemed diminished somehow, and her voice had a sweetness to it that I'd never heard before. "Sarah, do you have a moment? I'd love to chat about your future here." She'd never once asked about my future in 2 years. I followed her to her office, noting how she carefully closed the door behind us. "You're incredibly valuable to this team. I've been thinking about your growth trajectory, and I believe we need to have a serious conversation about your career development." I tilted my head, playing innocent. "That's interesting. I thought budgets were too tight for any changes right now." Her composed facade flickered for just a moment, like a mask slipping. "Well, things have a way of shifting when priorities become clearer." The desperation in her eyes was almost palpable. The following Monday, Janet from HR called me into her office with a warm smile I hadn't seen in months. "Great news, Sarah. We've found some flexibility in the budget for your salary adjustment." She slid a paper across her desk, an official raise approval for exactly the amount I'd requested 8 months ago. "This will be effective immediately, with back pay to your original request date." I stared at the document, a mix of satisfaction and disgust washing over me. The money had always been there. The budget had never been tight. They'd simply chosen to funnel it elsewhere while telling me to wait. "What changed?" I asked Janet directly. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Well, Linda brought it to our attention that you'd been waiting quite a while, and she felt it was important to address immediately." Linda had thrown herself on this grenade to try to buy my silence. But she didn't understand that this had moved far beyond money. It was about justice now. And 8 months, too late for half measures. Linda's first major mistake came 2 weeks later. In her nervous state, she'd been even more careless than usual. She meant to forward an email about adjusting the Patterson account to her personal email address, but instead sent it to our entire marketing team distribution list. The email was from her to someone with a personal Gmail address, discussing smoothing over the recent concerns and adjusting payment schedules to be less obvious. Tom from our creative team brought it to me, confused. "What's the Patterson account? I've never heard of this client." I looked at the email, my heart racing with excitement/disgust. "I have no idea," I said, taking a screenshot. But we both knew that wasn't true. No legitimate client discussions would be forwarded from personal emails or talk about making payments less obvious. Linda had just handed me more evidence of her fraud, and she didn't even realize it. The net was tightening, and she was the one pulling the strings. I maintained my poker face perfectly, acting like nothing had changed even as my evidence file grew thicker. Every suspicious email, every questionable invoice, every moment when Linda's story didn't add up, I documented it all on a secure cloud drive with multiple backups. I'd learned to be methodical, patient. Linda was spiraling, making mistakes left and right, and I was there to catch every one of them. During team meetings, I watched her carefully, noting how her hands shook when she discussed budgets, how she avoided eye contact when talking about department expenses. She was cracking under the pressure of not knowing how much I knew or who else might be watching.
I'd created a detailed timeline showing the correlation between her fake consulting payments and every legitimate employee request she denied. If she thought she could make me disappear, she'd learn that I'd already made sure the truth would outlive any corporate retaliation. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Linda finally showed her true colors. She cornered me by the copy machine, making sure no one else was around. Her voice was low and threatening, a complete departure from the fake sweetness she'd been trying lately. "Sarah, I hope you understand that digging into things that don't concern you could be very bad for your career. Some information is confidential for important reasons." She stepped closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the sharp scent of desperation. People who go looking for trouble usually find more than they bargained for. I looked her straight in the eye, no longer the intimidated employee who'd begged for a raise months ago. "I never go looking for trouble, Linda, but I'm very good at recognizing it when it finds me." I paused, letting the words sink in, "and I'm even better at documenting it." Her face went pale, and I knew she understood exactly what I meant. The transformation in Linda's behavior was almost comical. Suddenly, I was her favorite employee. She brought me expensive coffee from the shop downstairs, praising my work in team meetings, and even reassigned some of my heavier workload to other team members. "Sarah's been carrying too much," she announced in our weekly check-in. "I want to make sure she has time to focus on strategic initiatives." My coworkers were baffled by the sudden special treatment. Tom asked me directly, "What's going on with Linda? She's acting like she's her long-lost daughter or something." I just shrugged, playing innocent. Maybe she finally realized how much work I've been doing. But everyone could see the change was dramatic and sudden. The Whisper Network was now focused on Linda's mysterious transformation, with theories ranging from guilt to blackmail. They weren't wrong about the blackmail part, though Linda had essentially blackmailed herself through her own carelessness and corruption. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Linda asked me to stay late for a strategic discussion, and when the office emptied out, she locked her door behind us. Her hands were visibly shaking as she opened her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your dedication to the company, and I want to show my appreciation in a more personal way." She slid the envelope across her desk. Inside was $3,000 in cash. "This is just between us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A bonus for your exceptional work, and maybe we can just forget about any confusion or misunderstandings that might have come up recently." My skin crawled. She was literally trying to bribe me with cash, off the books, to ignore her embezzlement. I stared at the money, then at her desperate face. "This is very generous, Linda," I said carefully. "I appreciate you recognizing my value." I took the envelope, watching relief flood her features. She had no idea she'd only just handed me evidence of attempted bribery. I pocketed the cash and walked out of Linda's office with a smile. But my first stop was the parking garage, where I photographed the envelope and money with my phone, documenting the date, time, and location. I immediately forwarded the photos to my personal lawyer with a detailed explanation of the attempted bribe. Then I did something Linda would never expect. I set up an automated email timer to send my complete evidence file to the CFO, HR, and the business journal in exactly 72 hours. If anything happened to me, if I was suddenly fired or transferred, if there were any mysterious performance issues in my file, the timer would ensure the truth came out. It was my insurance policy, my dead man's switch. Linda thought she'd bought my silence with $3,000 and a few threats. Instead, she'd given me the final piece of evidence I needed and a timeline for her own destruction. The countdown had begun, and she didn't even know it. Friday morning, Linda looked at me with hopeful, pleading eyes during our team meeting. She actually asked for my input on budget allocation, treating me like a trusted advisor rather than a subordinate. "Sarah always has such valuable insights on resource management," she said, smiling nervously at me across the conference table. After the meeting, she lingered, clearly wanting to talk privately.
I hope we understand each other now, she said quietly. I know I wasn't always supportive of your requests before, but I want you to know that I see your potential now. We're a team. For the first time, she wasn't speaking to me as a superior to a subordinate. She was begging. The power dynamic had completely flipped, and we both knew it. I smiled back at her, genuinely this time. Linda, after 8 months of waiting, I completely understand your position. Her relief was visible, but she had no idea what was coming. I had learned patience from watching her delays, and now it was her turn to wait for the consequences of her actions. That afternoon, I watched Linda jump every time her phone rang or an email notification chimed. She'd created her own prison of paranoia, constantly wondering if today would be the day her fraud was exposed. I found myself almost feeling sorry for her until I remembered the dismissive way she'd waved off my requests, the condescending smiles, the months of financial stress I'd endured while she diverted money to fake consulting firms. During lunch, I casually mentioned to Janet from HR that I'd noticed Linda seemed stressed lately. I hope everything's okay with her. She's been working so many late nights. Janet frowned with concern. I hadn't noticed. Thanks for bringing it up. I'll check in with her. I knew Janet would start paying closer attention to Linda's behavior now, adding another layer of scrutiny to her already cracking facade. The web of observation was tightening, with Linda at the center, trapped by her own guilty conscience and my careful manipulations. Monday morning brought the explosion I'd been waiting for. The CFO's assistant called an emergency meeting with Linda, citing irregularities in department expense reports that require immediate clarification. Word spread through the office like wildfire. Corporate was conducting an unscheduled financial review of our department. Linda tried to maintain her composure, but I could see her hands trembling as she gathered files for the meeting. She kept glancing in my direction, and I could practically read her thoughts. Did Sarah trigger this investigation? How much do they know? The paranoia was eating her alive. During the meeting, which lasted 3 hours, I could hear raised voices through Linda's office door. When she finally emerged, her usual perfect makeup was smudged, and her confident stride had been replaced by uncertain, hesitant steps. The hunter had become the hunted, and she knew it. By Wednesday, rumors were flying that Linda had been placed on administrative leave pending the completion of the financial review. Her office door remained closed with a security keycard scanner blocking access. Movers arrived Thursday morning to pack up her personal items, working under the watchful eye of building security. The official company email was diplomatically worded. Linda Stevens will be pursuing new opportunities outside Morrison & Associates, effective immediately. We thank her for her service and wish her well in her future endeavors. But everyone knew the truth. You don't get escorted out by security when you're pursuing new opportunities. The investigation had found what I'd known for months. Linda had been systematically frauding the company through fake consulting invoices. Her name disappeared from the company website within 24 hours, as if she had never existed. Justice had finally caught up with her, and it was more thorough than I had ever imagined. The following week, Marcus Webb, our CFO, called me into his office with a proposal I hadn't expected. Sarah, we're restructuring the marketing department after recent changes in leadership. Your name came up repeatedly during our review as someone who consistently delivered results despite limited resources. He leaned forward, his expression serious but respectful. We'd like to offer you Linda's position as marketing department manager, along with a significant salary increase and budget oversight responsibilities. I sat quietly for a moment, processing the irony. The position I'd never dared dream of wanting was being offered to me by the same company that had ignored my modest raise request for 8 months. The board was particularly impressed by your loyalty and integrity during a difficult period, Marcus continued. We need someone we can trust to rebuild department morale and ensure proper financial oversight. I smiled, thinking about Linda's desperate attempts to buy my silence. I'll need some time to consider the full scope of the responsibilities, I replied professionally. Now, 6 months later,
I sit in what used to be Linda's corner office, sipping coffee from the expensive espresso machine she had approved while claiming budgets were too tight for employee raises. The irony isn't lost on me. I've completely restructured the department's budget transparency, implementing approval processes that make it impossible for anyone to create fictional consulting expenses. Every vendor is verified, every invoice is cross-referenced, and every employee request is handled with the respect and consideration that should have been standard from the beginning. My team trusts me because I've been where they are: overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. Linda's desperate attempts to buy my silence ultimately cost her everything: her career, her reputation, and her freedom from the investigation that followed. The criminal charges for embezzlement were filed last month. When I found that first suspicious email, I had no idea it would lead to this complete reversal of our positions. She taught me that patience, documentation, and strategic thinking are more powerful than any desperate bribe. The truth, it turns out, was louder than anything she could ever silence.